It takes me an hour and a half to drive from Ocean City to South Philadelphia, and there's plenty of expensive tolls. I only did it because I want to hear Don Camera talk about his greatest role model. Damn it, I don't think Don's even home.
Let's go, let's get in here. We gotta talk about Atget. Atget was my favorite photographer when I took my first history of photography class. The right guy for photography at the right time and certainly in the right place. He made 10,000 photographs of Paris between 1890 and 1926. While little cameras have been invented, the Kodak camera, photography's getting modern, he's still walking around with an 8x10 view camera, making glass plates. This shows you the glass negative because this is the crackling. The emulsion crackled off the glass.
Despite its occasional flaws, the old-fashioned camera that Atget used could capture infinitely more detail than the much easier-to-use Kodak cameras. Atget wanted an almost forensic level of clarity.
So Atget, with his insistence on perfect objectivity, ultimately that became an aspect of modernism. In 1930, he was first written about here in America. The writer equates his pictures to almost that of a crime scene. He felt like all the evidence of culture was right there. When I heard that as a student, I thought, man, that's something to aspire to. And then I started learning a little bit about his life, that he was somebody who wore the same clothes all the time, a la John Thornton and Don Camera. When I saw a picture of his own personal office space, it was just sawhorses and a couple of planks. I've had plywood floors in my house for the last 35 years. I can't believe they've lasted that long. He was a guy that found a way to photograph the human condition from a psychological point of view without even humans being there. Most people would kind of come in, they'd crop out the rest, they'd fill the front. But Atget chose to back off and show that empty bench. When you look at that picture, I get kids to talk about it, and eventually they end up with emptiness, loneliness, all dressed up but nowhere to go. What's this all about? So they finally come around to it's really a picture about the bench in relation to this moment with this incredibly elegant statue that's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but yet it's all by itself and nobody's looking at it. This has got to be like one of the poorest people in France, but in his mind, he's got his beans growing, he's got a place to air out his shoes. The sheep is right up there on the roof. If you're looking for it, you know where to find it. Maybe life's not so bad. I'm a man that believes in getting the most out of the least. And Atget lived his whole life that way. So somebody who was able to get so much and need so little, it seemed, and then whether he was happy or not, certainly he lived a life he wanted to live. He was not dictated to by anybody. As far as I'm concerned, he's like the firing pin for photographers into the modern age.
That sounds good, but I know why you really like Atget. I looked him up on Wikipedia, and it said he is a flaneur. Flaneur, which means stroller, lounger, loafer, idler, urban explorer.
Marcy, get the baseball bat!
And that is exactly what you are.
I know what you were just doing. I recently learned the definition of the word to troll. Bystander, the history of street photography. A flaneur was really a bystander, someone who just stood by and let the world happen and made the picture completely unaffecting the scene. You know how it is when somebody takes out a camera, immediately everybody starts voguing for the camera. Completely changes the dynamic. Atget was invisible. He wore an old black coat. He was an old man carrying around this big old camera. Nobody noticed him.
Was he just some young kid who learned about photography and became good at it?
A very leading question. He actually didn't pick up a camera until he was 40 years old. He was born in 1857. Parents died by the time he was 10 years old. was raised by his grandfather, and his grandfather was a carriage maker, a workman, a craftsman. So here's what I think, and this is totally speculative, but what is photography but speculating about the human condition? And we all know that who somebody is as a child definitely creates the frames of reference of who they'll be as a grown-up and what their aspirations and so on might have if things work out. And in Atget's case, I think that's what happened. He was a guy who knew and was taught probably very young, you got to take care of yourself. There's nobody going to be around to take care of you. So he was someone that was prepared to do whatever. In his first incarnation, he wanted to be an actor. He tried to get into the acting academies. That didn't work out. He just went out. He was a touring actor on his own and was moderately successful. Met the woman that would be with him forever, who he never married. It was just his mistress for 30 years. He always had his own place. And then after that, the acting thing didn't work. He decided, I'll try my hand at painting. And he really felt like he didn't have the touch for that. So 1890 rolls around. He's 37 years old. And he decides, all right, this photography thing is the way to go. So this guy worked really hard. He was a teenager during the Franco-Prussian War. He hunkered down and survived that. He survived World War I as a 50-year-old man at that range. So this guy knew how to survive. And they say that he was financially secure. He was someone that made money doing what he did.
Atget made photographs for clients. Photography wasn't his hobby. It wasn't art for art's sake. It was his business. Broadly speaking, his career had two periods. From 1900 to 1926, he primarily documented Paris and its environs. His photographs were bought by historical societies and libraries interested in preserving French culture. But when he started out, from 1890 to the turn of the century, his paying customers were mostly artists, illustrators, and craftsmen who wanted reference material to help them realize their own imagery. So what was he trying to do in his photographs for artists?
He would refer to them, I think, almost as like stage sets. Here's the stage with all its stuff in place, and you, the illustrator, you, the artisan, buy these pictures for your reasons to fulfill the acting on the stage. You pick a little piece of it if you're an illustrator. Well, here's Atget's photograph of the room, right? Now that statue, it's in the picture, but it kind of plays a small role. And the reflection of the statue is barely visible in the photograph, right? But it's pretty prominent in the illustration because that little fanny is a very attractive little thing. This is the raw stage, but this is how this particular actor took on the scene. So he would make a photograph, and this person, for example, might use it in their illustration for some sort of catalog. This particular illustrator bought this Atget photograph of the interior of a bar, and all he ended up using was the way the bottles were lined up on the shelf. That made it into his particular drawing. Here's a picture he made of a knife sharpener. Tristan Klingzor bought it and turned it into that. A certain illustrator hired him to go do a series about the prostitutes. He wanted pictures of prostitutes, where they lived, their clients, everything about them, because he was an illustrator and he needed that as raw data. These were the etudes of the 20th century. In the earliest days, the 1890s, he shot a lot of people. The very first picture, one that he's pretty famous for, is unusual because there's a certain amount of exuberance here, right? That's the only picture like that in my mind in Atget's oeuvre. These are more for the caricaturists, they're the cartoonists, for the illustrators. So these are not really portraits in any way, but they're pictures of character types. That's your archetypal street worker. He photographed details because he made pictures for all kinds of artisans, and the early 1900s is also known as the era of the replica. So there was all kinds of fantastic furniture being built, all kinds of great ironwork being simulated. He created a system that organized those 10,000 pictures so he would know which picture was where with numbers and names. So when somebody said, I need a door knocker with a little boy, he would just hit his files and find it. So people that did mechanical drawings would buy his photographs of architecture. But that's where his big money ultimately would come from. He realized that France was changing, demolition and renovation.
In the last 3 decades of his life, Atget's obsession with documenting Paris of the past, present, and future has made him popular with more than just art photo buffs.
His biggest clients were institutions and libraries, antiquarian people, because he knew they're going to keep the pictures.
And we are so lucky that they did. Some of his most beautiful were of the gardens at Versailles and the Tuileries. Atget captured the great beauty of his beloved city, and he also portrayed its melancholy and loneliness. He memorialized the dignity of the French working class. In one of his notable series, he documented the intimate interiors of Parisian homes. What a feast for the eyes he has given us.
He was 43 years old at the turn of the century when he saw the horse-drawn wagons disappear and the French metro appear. He saw Paris absorb all the little towns and villages and become thousands of factories and workshops. He was a guy who knew the combination of these machines, the way the French have lived forever and ever, is changing right now. It was all that turn of the century stuff. He was right there, but he was there as a 40-year-old guy that had his frames of reference already formed.
Did he consider himself to be making art?
Definitely not. Maybe in the secretiveness of his brain, he thought he was doing something big, and I would range it more in the realm of visual philosophy than art. He said nothing about his pictures. He was somebody that saw the modern world coming into position, but he saw it from such a mature point of view that it was acknowledged as being pretty insightful.
As I look at Atget's photographs, I do see many of them as art. In the early 20th century, Atget was surrounded by the great modern artists who lived in or migrated to Paris, and his work was especially prized by the Surrealists.
My favorites always are the mannequins, the greatest of the symbolic statements. My mother would iron my clothes every day before I had to go to high school. My biggest joke is, when you see me with buttons on my shirt, I'm being paid. Or somebody died, one or the other. Your whole life you hear, oh, the clothes make the man, Donald. The clothes make the man, Donald. It's like, no, the clothes are nothing because they've got no heads. You know, the clothes are just stuffed suits.
Don told me that Atget and the American surrealist Man Ray lived on the same street in Paris. The younger artist was very taken by the older photographer's work and bought one for a specific purpose.
You know, they talk about this picture as a picture that's important because it kind of shows all segments of society, well-to-do people in top hats, working-class guys, clerks out for lunch, a little kid just ignoring it all, paying attention to the photographer right here. Yeah, and what are they doing? They're all looking at an eclipse with the little glasses. So they're participating in a modern thing. Here's the poster that they ultimately took this picture for, and they wanted to give him credit, and he insisted that they not put his name on it. All he said was, I make documents.
I leave South Philadelphia totally inspired after hearing my friend's spellbinding take on a true pioneer of photography. If only Don's French pronunciation was a tad bit more refined.
How's the proper pronunciation?
Flaneur.
Flaneur is how I say it. It's somebody you know. They're always watching.